Welcome to participating in a THIRA process. This presentation is intended for agencies, organizations, and public officials who will be participating in their local threat and hazard identification and risk assessment process. This short presentation should lead you to answers to the three questions posed on this slide. First, you will understand what the standard threat and hazard identification and risk assessment process entails. Second, you should be ready to participate in the THIRA process. And third, you will understand how the THIRA process results can be used. THIRA is an abbreviation for Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment. The Department of Homeland Security first issued guidance for the THIRA process in 2012. Each state was required to complete this standardized process in order to continue receiving grant funding from Homeland Security. The second edition of the THIRA guidance was issued in April of 2013. Essentially, the THIRA provides a standardized process for a jurisdiction to examine the risks it faces. By understanding its risks, a jurisdiction can make smart decisions about how to manage that risk and develop the capabilities it needs to do so. The guide pictured on this slide is easily found by typing in THIRA Homeland Security in any search engine. This slide illustrates how the National Preparedness System is supposed to work. On the outside of the circle in light blue are the words Whole Community, National Incident Management System, and Core Capabilities. This is intended to convey that there are capabilities the entire nation must pay attention to and build, from the local system through state and federal systems. Everyone should know and be able to work within the National Incident Management System, or NIMS. So everyone is encouraged to take several online courses covering NIMS and the Incident Command System, or ICS. Involvement of the whole community is intended to move us away from a few people making plans in isolation toward a planning culture that includes citizenry and the different entities making up not only the emergency response, but others who are potentially impacted by an event. This includes businesses, infrastructure partners, schools, health and medical entities, and populations in our community who are vulnerable to the effects of disaster. The spokes on the wheel show the overall process of preparedness, starting at the top with identifying and assessing risk, then moving around the circle to estimate what it would take to have the capabilities you need to mitigate or respond to the risk or threat. These two components are addressed with the THIRA process. The results of the process position you to move around the rest of the circle, building the capabilities you need, planning to deliver them, validating them, and continuing to review and update them. The THIRA process helps communities answer these questions by providing context via scenarios that embody the risks most likely to occur in a jurisdiction. It is always easier to imagine what you will need if you have a scenario to react to. So, for example, in Nebraska, we would not be considering the impacts of a hurricane. Instead, we think about tornadoes or floods or human-caused events like shootings or hazardous materials incidents. In some areas of the state, we may also be considering terrorism and nuclear plant failures. In others, an agriculture-related event like avian influenza may be of primary concern. These scenarios are locally driven and not prescribed by the federal government. The scenario helps the community and state determine what they need to prepare for, what resources are needed, including plans, organization, equipment, training, and exercises, and what actions need to be taken to either lessen the threat or prepare for a healthy recovery. This slide answers the question of what the THIRA process looks like. It is a four-step process that looks a little bit different for every jurisdiction, but the general activities are all similar. Step 1 involves identifying what the most likely threats and hazards are for your community or jurisdiction. These may be human-caused, such as technological, terrorism, or criminal acts, or natural disasters such as flooding, tornadoes, or drought. Step 2 is giving the threat or hazard context, in essence, creating scenarios. For example, a tornado going through the center of town at midday creates a different set of circumstances than one that occurs in the evening or in another part of town. We set up scenarios so they stress our capabilities to respond and recover, but we do not go into absurdity. In this step, we actually construct multiple scenarios because no single realistic scenario taxes all of our resources. So we may have one scenario that involves a technological breach that takes out most businesses offline for a period of time, side by side with the scenario of a natural disaster. Both stress different parts of our system. The first two steps will be completed for you by emergency management personnel. The third step is to establish statements that capture what we want to have happen for each capability area. This is really just describing what we would like, ideally, to have happen in a number of different capability areas. For example, we may decide that ideally we would like to have businesses that take credit cards back online within 12 hours of an internet security breach that has been taken offline. Or we may decide that ideally we would like to have shelter space for 1,000 people in our community set up and ready to go within 4 hours of an event. These form the targets or ideals that we are going to start planning for. From here, we can move on to step 4 and determine what it would take to meet our desired outcomes. For example, to have shelters set up for 1,000 people, we would need 1,000 cots, space for them to be set up, and teams of people to staff the shelters. In addition, we would need to train the people to staff the shelters and incorporate that into our exercises. For the cybersecurity threat, we would potentially need people trained with the access to infrastructure needed to seek out and neutralize the threat that took us offline, as well as people trained and ready to reboot the systems. By identifying our resource requirements, we can start seeing the gaps between what we can do now versus what we would ideally like to be able to do. Then we can begin making plans to narrow those gaps. The THIRA workshop will be focused on accomplishing step 3. This slide lists the capabilities that local, state, and federal emergency plans are designed to address. Across the top of the chart, you see the 5 emergency management phases: prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. Some capabilities apply to multiple phases, like planning, public information and warning, and operational coordination. Others may be more specifically associated with a single category, like economic recovery being associated with the recovery phase, or search and rescue associated with response. These are the capabilities we are concerned about setting ideal outcomes for when we go through the THIRA process. The next question is why we care about the THIRA process. The short answer to this big question is that the capabilities established in your jurisdiction directly impact the ability of response and recovery agencies to provide the support community members expect after an event. Whether it is a tornado, flood, cybersecurity breach, or a criminal act, we all count on response agencies to have the capability to respond appropriately. Results of the THIRA process are identified and used in various ways. Local and regional THIRA processes help local planners identify capability gaps, which in turn guides the development of plans, choice of training, focus of exercises, and the type of equipment and supplies that are prioritized for purchase. Each state must complete a THIRA process as well. In Nebraska, we've constructed 7 scenarios and rolled up the capability targets identified by local areas to come up with a set of capability targets that guide our homeland security strategy. They also support the funding decisions that are made for the State Homeland Security Grant Program and help form the state's preparedness report, which goes to the legislature and the governor, as well as the federal government. At the federal level, state gaps are rolled up to form a picture of the nation's preparedness, which is annually reported to Congress. This slide will show what the reporting picture looks like for the results of the THIRA. First, Nebraska is divided into 8 planning, exercise, and training regions. Each of these regions is asked to complete the THIRA process locally to determine the gaps and capabilities needed for their areas. This also helps guide decision-making by officials when they must ask for assistance either from other areas or agencies or from the state. Regional THIRA results are combined with the results from the state process. This is sent to FEMA regions. Each Federal Emergency Management region also completes the THIRA process, again using results from the states and from its own assessment. Those results are combined by FEMA to create a picture of the nation's preparedness, which is sent to Congress and to the President. What we've learned, for example, from the 2014 data is that cybersecurity is the lowest rated core capability in state and territory self-assessments. We also learned that 5 capabilities are national areas of improvement: cybersecurity, housing, infrastructure systems, long-term vulnerability reduction, economic recovery, and access control and identity verification. These could be on the list because the right partners were not at the table, or because these capabilities have not been prioritized for development at the state and local levels. When you arrive at the THIRA workshop, you can expect to be given information about the scenarios that have been constructed to give you context. This will include data about the impacted areas, which will be helpful to you as you consider our ideal outcomes for each capability given the scenarios. Next, we will break into smaller groups to consider the 31 capabilities. You will likely feel comfortable working on some of the capabilities and may not have much to say about others, and that's okay. There will be a short time to consider each one, so the goal is to quickly come up with a statement about the ideal outcome related to that capability. You will be asked to make them quantifiable if possible. That means setting quantities or timelines using phrases like within 4 hours or providing shelter for 1,000 people. These are quantifiable and measurable. More specific instructions will be given to you at the workshop. You can be prepared by being familiar with your agency's own emergency plans before you come to the workshop. Congratulations! You are now ready to participate in the threat and hazard identification and risk assessment process. To learn more about Nebraska's Homeland Security Planning Project, please visit your local emergency management website, Nebraska Emergency Management Agency's website, or go to the web address on this slide for more helpful links. This presentation was created by the University of Nebraska Public Policy Center in cooperation with the Lancaster County Emergency Management Agency with funding from the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency.